Well, let's go to some questions today, Jim, and let's start here on Twitter. This first one was sent in using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Deshaun Brown.
Deshaun Brown from Houston town.
Is he from Houston?
Why would I have just said that if he wasn't? If he was from Poughkeepsie, it would make no sense.
I don't know. Okay, well.
Deshaun is from Houston. He's one of the cult members on Twitter. You're not paying attention.
I didn't know he had a rhyme that was pre-prepared for him here, but let's get his question. Watching this match from 1988 WCW, it's JYD and Michael Hayes versus two jobbers. Whose idea was it to pair these two? Was Hayes a face? And by the way, fuck Vince Russo. I guess he is a cult member, but yes. I gotta say, he's right about that. It really did bother me whenever you would have babyface Michael Hayes and JYD associated with each other. I thought they should have never had any involvement ever again, just based off how hot their angle was in 1980.
Well, but here's the thing, and because Deshaun's from Houston, and JYD was huge down there. In 1988, besides the fact that I don't know, I can't remember how Michael Hayes ended up as a babyface, but he was for and you know, it wasn't 88, it was 89. It was 89 because that's when TBS had already bought Crockett out, and they were both there together because JYD had come back in with George Scott, I believe. Was it not? Or was it 88?
JYD was back, I think, in 88.
Well, then I may be, but regardless, they both ended up as baby faces. But at that point, except for the Mid-South area, obviously, New Orleans and Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas, the angle was so hot there, but nobody had seen it on national television, and it was 8 years removed, and nobody was thinking about it. And I don't think that Crockett or TBS or Dusty or whoever was responsible for this particular period would have given two shits anyway, unfortunately, except the fans who had seen it and knew how big it was and knew how hot it was. Their brains had to explode, and it exposed the business for them to be standing there with no fucking mentions, no issues and whatever. But that was once again, lack of quality control and was beginning even back then when everything started expanding and the two big companies started thinking nothing matters unless we did it. And both sides were guilty of that.
Everyone turns back and forth. You grew up seeing people in Memphis turn all the time. But are there examples where, similar to this, where you think they had such a hot program, there's no reason they should ever be teamed up, or it doesn't feel right when they're together? Like, I remember in 1987, the WWF, you had Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat in this blood feud. He tried to cripple Ricky Steamboat, not cripple him, but he tried to make it so he couldn't breathe or talk or swallow or use his vocal cords. He tried to crush his throat.
Right.
And then by the end of the year, they're on the same Survivor Series team. And there were other examples like that.
Well, yeah, and once again, Vince was never great on historical details, even when it was the fucking earlier in the same year. But I've got to admit, once again, a lot of places, just assume that people go along with it in a turn and then everybody's friends. But if you notice, most of the southern territories, once again, at least try to do it right. When you turned in Mid-South Wrestling, because the TV from the time it was shot in Shreveport to the time that it made all the towns on the loop was about 5 or 6 weeks. The first show that you taped in Shreveport was 6 weeks later before it aired in the last show, I should say, before it aired in every market. The point is,
that is crazy.
Well, but see, here's the thing. Here's the genius of it. The genius of it was that because Watts, all of his towns were on a 2-week loop, his regular towns. They ran every 2 weeks, except for New Orleans, it was weekly. So what you could do is you could time angles to where the TV where they were shot or the TV where they were shot and then followed up on aired in a town right before the house show that weekend. And he had so many big markets. Well, I should say that night because we did house shows every night of the week, but especially the big towns on the weekends. So the same hot TV would air before the show in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Lake Charles, and the next week before the show in Houston and Beaumont and maybe Alexandria, and the week before that or the week after that it would air right before the house show in Jackson, Mississippi, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and then Tulsa and Oak City was last. But you always had a hot TV airing before your fucking live event. It was insane the way it was put together. But as a result, here's where I'm going with this. If you switched until the TV got around, basically Jim Neidhart switched from heel to babyface on Butch Reed on his way out of the territory and had to dress in a broom closet. Watts wouldn't let him dress with the heels or the baby faces because he was in the middle of the turn on TV. So in some places, they'd seen him turn babyface so he could go ahead and dress with the baby faces. But in some places, they hadn't seen him turn yet, but he couldn't dress with the heels because he had actually turned, if anybody, so he would dress in a broom closet. In Houston one night, he came out of a fucking janitor's door. But anyway, in the South, remember in Atlanta, one of the best turns ever was Ole Anderson turning babyface and spending that year teaming with Tommy Rich and Tony Atlas and Wrestling 2. Also that he could make up to Dusty Rhodes and get Dusty Rhodes to agree to be his partner after their blood feud where they had screamed it will never be over. And then finally, after a year, he gets him one match and then two matches. And he says, how about a cage? And he does that. And then there you go. And they turn on him. And Ole does that promo. There was in Memphis, despite all the horrible things that Jerry Lawler did to Bill Dundee when Lawler turned babyface the first time, Dundee still didn't kind of trust him for a few weeks or whatever, but finally they got the team together. But then the next time it took longer. And sometimes they would do plays off not being able to trust Handsome, because Handsome Jimmy turned and never changed what he was doing, except occasionally he'd put that dark eye makeup on and make it look like he was crazy. He was still Handsome Jimmy. They gave guys personal reasons to be mad at each other. And then sometimes when they switched back and forth, they would work spots off of, well, I don't trust so-and-so. And it would take a little while. But it was a weekly territory, so it wouldn't take as long as other places. But there would be that they would do angles basically on, will so-and-so ever team with so-and-so now that he's seen the light and come to the right side. A lot of companies, and especially the WWF guys, just turned and, fuck it.
Why do you think that is that Vince didn't do it the way that, let's say, Mid-South did it, the correct way? Do you think it's because Vince had a lack of attention to detail, or that he thought the fans had a lack of attention to detail?
I think that's what, I think he was just used that there. We're going to explain it. He turned. Boom. Move on. He never put. And I mean, think about this in the old days. I know this will be sacrilegious to the older WWF fans, but it was not complicated booking in the 60s and 70s. And the pattern, bring in the heel, get him over on TV for 6 or 8 weeks. The two tapings, Allentown and Hamburg. Then Hamburg, whatever it is. I don't know. You say tomato, I say fuck off. But anyway, it'd get them over on squash matches. Then they'd make the arenas for a month or two, and they'd finally beat Strongbow or, whoever was in that spot, and then they'd get their title matches. And the first one would be, DQ Bruno or Stop on Blood. And the second one would be what the first one was. And then the third one, if they got that far, if they were drawing that well, Bruno would get the win. And then they'd cycle back through the baby faces and then the heel would leave. But they didn't have to do complicated stuff. They had major population centers and monthly shows, and it was easy to follow for. And once again, as we've talked about before, a lot of it came from, and we'll have a very interesting conversation coming up. Should we tell them this week? We're going to have Meltzer on this week, for fuck's sake, on the experience, following up on the Montreal episode on Viceland. But anyway, we were talking about that. The Northeast, the ethnic heroes, they relied a lot on the ethnic language newspapers, the Italian papers or whatever, for their publicity early on when the New York papers were still shitting on wrestling. And then they got the fucking their patterns established. And so it was formula booking. And then, Watts turned on Bruno and sold out. And then Spiros Arian turned on Bruno and they sold out. And then Zbyszko turned on Bruno, and they say every 5 years somebody would turn on Bruno, right?
He's a very trusting man.
Well, but that's why it was only every 5 years, because he couldn't look stupid, right? But that was what they did, and it worked. But down south, it was smaller towns, weekly shows, etc. You had to have more logic and explanation in the shit, because you were getting, in a large part, the same people 52 times a year.